Namaskaram. Welcome to the first of our Raja Yoga teachings, part of the 4 yoga training course at Arya Marga Yoga, coming to you from Himachal Pradesh in India. We were talking about the Raja Yoga's structure. We are now going to introduce to you the 4-part structure of Raja Yoga. The Raja Yoga text and the system is made up of 4 parts. The first part is called Samadhi in Sanskrit. Now, Samadhi is actually higher consciousness. We attain this higher consciousness with our mind. But this higher consciousness stage, which we can all say quite frankly that it's out of our reach right now, so why is that introduced right in the beginning? That should be something that comes way after, say in the 2nd or 3rd or maybe the last chapter. Because this higher consciousness is what we are trying to reach, right? So how come it comes right in the beginning? That's because this chapter called Samadhi or higher consciousness, it gives you the entire psychology of your mind. How does the human mind work? In a very simplified, direct structure. Once you know this, then it takes you to what is yoga. It defines yoga. And then it says, what are the different types of yoga? There's not just one yoga, as we know. There are different types of yoga. What are these different types of yoga? What are the obstacles to reaching these different types of yoga? What are the obstacles on the yogic path? And what are the aids? What helps us on the yogic path? All of this together comprises the first chapter called Samadhi. So this chapter is giving us the entire structure of the Raja Yoga, how to approach this. As we know, Raja Yoga is something dealing purely with the mind. Nothing else. All the other yogas dealing with the body, the senses, the breath, all of them have been left behind. And we have gone directly to the top. That's why it's called Raja Yoga, Royal Yoga. We are approaching directly to the mind. And so we need to know exactly and in a direct way, in a simplified way, how does the mind work? So that now we can engineer this mind. So, the types of yoga, the types of Raja Yoga, the types of psychological yoga are mentioned in the first chapter also, along with their obstacles, the obstacles to attaining the path of yoga. And now we come to the 2nd chapter, Sadhana Pada. Sadhana. Sadhana means your discipline. The method that you are practicing constantly, that is your sadhana. There is something that you're doing every day that becomes your sadhana. So, taking that to a higher level by following some higher methods would be this part of Raja Yoga, and that is the sadhana that is mentioned in chapter 2. Sadhana chapter tells you about the psychological blocks. The psychological blocks that make up your personality and mine. Your personality is different and so is mine. Our personalities, according to Raja Yoga, are our limitations. Limitations, they're circles. And we cannot go outside that circle. We can't experience life from outside our personality. So, how to achieve this expansion of personality? That is in the 2nd chapter called Sadhana. And in that 2nd chapter, we are further given the actual system of Raja Yoga, the methods and the system. The name of the system of Raja Yoga is Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-part yoga. So the 8-part yoga, because it is made up of 8 parts together, and they have to be practiced together. They combine the body, the senses, the breath, the mind, and prana. All these 5 parts are brought together, and then we achieve the 6th, 7th and 8th stages. The last 3 stages of the Raja Yoga are mentioned not in the Sadhana chapter, but rather in the 3rd chapter called Vibhuti. And so we move to the 3rd chapter, where we now progress to the 6th, 7th and 8th, the highest levels of Raja Yoga. Now, at these highest levels of Raja Yoga, we are given certain signs, certain marks of accomplishment. How do you know that you have achieved something in this Raja Yoga? It is so difficult to track your progress. For example, in Hatha Yoga, it's very easy to see our progress. How is that? When you're doing a headstand, maybe you cannot do the headstand today, but you can do the headstand after 2 weeks of practice, and then after a month of practice, you're easily holding a headstand for 5 minutes or more. That's obvious progress, and that you can see in the physical Hatha Yoga. In the breath-based yoga, you can see through your breath holding capacity how easily you can do this and how well you're progressing. There also you can see this progress. But in psychological yoga, how do we know whether we are progressing? Those signs and marks of progress are given in this 3rd chapter called Vibhuti, along with the powers of yoga. When we accomplish the 6th, 7th and 8th stages of yoga, which is mentioned in the 3rd chapter, then we can apply our mind, which has now suddenly become very powerful, into certain techniques. If you apply them into those techniques, you will get what is called siddhis or yogic powers. Those powers and the dangers associated by being tempted by those powers, these are all mentioned in that chapter 3 called Vibhuti. And finally, we come down to the last and 4th chapter of this great text called Raja Yoga, Kaivalya, ultimate liberation. Why are we doing all of this? To be free. And the ultimate freedom that is achievable by the human consciousness. And that is in chapter 4, the highest chapter of Raja Yoga, which is ultimate freedom. And so this was a short introduction to the 4-chapter structure of Raja Yoga. And from the next class, we will be going forward with the first sutra of chapter 1. And we will move on sutra by sutra, covering all the chapters until you and I attain ultimate freedom. Thank you, and join us for the next class on Raja Yoga. Here from Arya Marga Yoga, I'm Roshan Mohandas. Thank you for joining us. Namaskaram.